Do you have petabytes of data that need to be stored safely, sustainably, and cost-effectively? Meet Fujifilm Tape. Yep, you heard that right. Tape. It's a solution that's become the backbone of many businesses' archive and data protection strategies. Tape allows you to store data with more longevity and efficiency than disk, and with much less expenditure over a 10-year period. Fujifilm has been pioneering innovation since 1934 and will continue to do so for many years to come. Learn more about how you can build your data storage strategy on tape with Fujifilm at builtontape.fujifilmusa.com. That's builtontape.fujifilmusa.com.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it is Aaron for Cloud News This Week. And as I hit record on this, we are rolling into the end of the year. It's just amazing and so hard to believe. But we're going to continue with Cloud News this week, and we've got a great interview coming up after the news as well. First item in Cloud News this week. Do you remember the JEDI contract? The government agency here in the United States, the Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure Contract, goes all the way back to, 2019 is when they had awarded the winner. It was awarded to Microsoft, and a bunch of people sued, and they kind of came back and rethought everything, and then it became the JWCC, Joint Warfighting Cloud Capability, initiative. They didn't really call that one an act, and this time they came out with an announcement this week, and this one, maybe it's just to prevent lawsuits, I don't know, but everyone gets a piece. Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and even Oracle have all been awarded portions of a $9 billion total that will go from now through 2028. They say this is to help out with multi-cloud implementations. But, and that could very well be true, but I think also a big portion of that is just to get all of this behind them and move on as well. And moving on to article number 2, I'm sure a lot of our listeners have been either playing around or seen great threads out there about the OpenAI, the new ChatGPT, which, by the way, I think over 1 million registered users in the first week. If you're not familiar with it, go check out the link. But at the end of the day, very conversational AI available, and you can pose questions to it. So there is a thread out there about actually taking the OpenAI ChatGPT and putting it through an AWS exam, and it passed. So congrats to ChatGPT. It is now an AWS certified cloud practitioner. It managed to score 800 out of 1,000, and a passing score is 720. Go check out the link with all of the questions in there and the answers and whether they were right or wrong in it. It's pretty entertaining. And lastly, we have a funding round announcement to talk to. We hadn't seen as many of these as of late, but also this may or may not be a trend we're going to start to see. So Snyk, SNYK, took another $196 million. And why do I say another? Because they've already taken over $1 billion. This is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.3, 1.4 billion they've taken in all of their rounds. But the valuation has actually gone down. So they did a down round. And only about 15 months after the last round, so they took $530 million at an $8.5 billion valuation. Gosh, back in September of last year. And they just announced this week another $195 million, but at a $7.4 billion valuation, a reduction of about 12%. Is this a trend we're going to continue to see? I don't know. We've been talking about a lot of organizations, instead of IPOing, just continuing to take rounds and get bigger and bigger. And we're not just seeing unicorns anymore. Unicorns are kind of a dime a dozen, but we're starting to see organizations taking hundreds, if not billions, in funding. And will that trend be sustainable as the interest rates go up and as the VC markets get a little tighter? Time will tell, but I thought that was an interesting data point. And lastly, we might be witnessing in real time the death of Rackspace, and pour one out for Rackspace. I certainly wish everyone over there the best, but we've been kind of partnered with Rackspace here and there. I mean, since the origins of this podcast, we've done some consulting work with them over the years, and I actually flew out to their headquarters and got to see the castle, and there's video of me sliding down the slide somewhere, but somewhere along the way, the fanatical support kind of went away. And then the fanatical support was their big tagline, and really helped with their customers over the year. And that's why a lot of folks continued to use them. But over the weekend, their email service, a lot of folks' emails just went dark. No really recognition of it from them. And then hours turned into days. And as of Tuesday, when I hit record on this, still not up, but they have acknowledged that there is a ransomware incident, and it could cost them upwards of $30 million to correct this. So lots of fallout that is going to come with this. This certainly is not over, and we'll continue to follow this story as it develops. So with that, I'm going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. Coming up after the break, we have Brian Thompson at HPE GreenLake Cloud Services.
Today's show is brought to you by AWS Insiders, a new, edgy, entertaining podcast from CloudFix about the future of cloud computing on AWS. On every show, your hosts Hillary and Rahul not only bring on top industry guests, but they also debate the most contentious topics in the industry. It's a great back and forth, and every episode includes a really interesting AWS use case. We checked out AWS Insiders, and we were super impressed with not only the quality of the guests, but also the depth of experience on both sides of every discussion. Search for AWS Insiders in your podcast player. We'll also include a link in the show notes. My thanks to AWS Insiders for their support.
It's our mission to give IT pros a break. So, here it is. We wish it was longer, but to keep saving IT pros time and money, we only paid for a 30-second ad. From racks and PDUs to backup power, Eaton and Trip Light have joined forces to bring more sanity to your day every day. Visit eaton.com/audio today.
And we're back. And this week we have a really interesting discussion, because something we've talked about many times over the years is the journey, and a little bit of what inflection points happen when. And we wanted to go and really talk about that and dig into that a little deeper. And so today we would like to welcome Brian Thompson, VP of Product Management at HPE GreenLake Cloud Services. So first of all, Brian, welcome to the show, and how are you doing?
Hey, Aaron, thanks so much for having me. I'm doing great. It's great to be here.
Great. And let's start by tell everyone a little bit about your background and what you focus on at HPE.
Yeah, perfect. So I have kind of been in the private and public cloud space, if you will, for a large number of years. I've been with HPE for about a year and a half, but prior to joining HPE, I was with Oracle in the OCI space, their Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, their hyperscale public cloud. I spent almost 6 years at Rackspace leading their private cloud space in OpenStack and delivering on-prem solutions. If you go way back, I was at Amazon for many years pre-AWS. So I've kind of been in that space. I joined HPE GreenLake specifically to help lead product management around a number of their cloud services, new solutions and offerings coming to market that we're bringing, delivering these cloud experiences, but for customers on-prem largely.
Fantastic. And so let's maybe start at the start, and then we'll work our way up to GreenLake. I mean, HPE is probably known to everyone here, but super iconic brand in computer history here, and a lot has evolved over the years. And so maybe let's start with, where does HPE fit in with the larger HP, and where does HPE and you specifically focus these days?
Yeah, no, that's a great line of conversation. It's funny, in being in the space in the industry, I was familiar with HPE, Hewlett Packard Enterprise, in joining. But as a brand, my parents still call me and ask if I can get them a deal on toner cartridges. What I mean by that is Hewlett Packard emerging out of the garage in Palo Alto. In 2015, Hewlett Packard and Hewlett Packard Enterprise split into two different entities. If you think about at the time, it was a very large portfolio of everything from consumer products, laptops, printers, imaging services, all the way through enterprise consulting services, enterprise servers, enterprise storage solutions, later the acquisition of Aruba networking, right? So the two entities split apart. Hewlett Packard Enterprise focuses on those large enterprise IT solutions, of course, starting with infrastructure of scalable enterprise compute, storage, and networking solutions. But of course, now where we're leading the way with more cloud services, delivering an as-a-service experience. But our focus, and really where HPE has shined of late, is delivering those cloud experiences where customers need them, whether they're on-prem or in co-location or an edge location, things that can't be served maybe natively by a public cloud.
Nice. And Brian, by the way, wow, gosh, this was years and years and years ago, but you can look up the founding garage there, the address on it in Silicon Valley, and me and a buddy drove by just to see it. So I can actually say I've seen the HP garage.
Yeah, it's a historical landmark. I think you can actually arrange to have tours of it. So
yeah. Hey, Brian, obviously, this show has covered the cloud for a while. We've seen lots happen over the last, decade, but even last 4 or 5 years in terms of public cloud adoption. And in some companies it's been a lot, in other companies it's been sort of dabbling. But we've seen some behavioral changes, right? So people have now kind of come to expect, like, hey, when I have a new technology idea, I'd like to just go implement that. I'd like to, be able to get things sort of on demand. I'd like things to scale. But not everything is in the public cloud. A lot of things are still on premises. HPE lives in both of those worlds, and as you talked about, has evolved a lot. How do you guys see what HPE's role is? Because you have a ton of resources to go help people do cloud-like things depending on where they want to be, what they want to do. Like, how do you see that role in terms of the evolution of HPE, the intersection now of sort of cloud and IT? How do those things fit together in your world?
Yeah, it is interesting. I think the public cloud changed that paradigm in a lot of ways of how do we think about quick access to resources. It's not just the cost piece, right? I think everybody started that assumption like, oh, pay for what I use. The public cloud must be cheaper, and everybody raced to public cloud. But I think the bigger things that drove it was that self-service experience. I don't have to file a ticket with my IT team to request a new server and wait a couple months for that, and then wait for an operator to lay down an OS on it. And now I need to get certain software on it or get access or networking. Like, the cloud and that self-service experience, I think, is equally as transformative as the idea of the utility consumption model. So that, how do I just quickly get access to these things? How do I enable my end users to be self-service and get their own needs and then just scale that up? That behavior is what I think has driven a lot of that. As you mentioned, HPE sits in the middle of that. How do I provide that same experience? But we're still serving enterprise needs, which may or may not go into that public cloud environment. I think we have become a complementary or enabler for that private and public cloud marriage, right? You think about a hybrid cloud experience, as every enterprise has some amount of public cloud, but every enterprise is also facing where they have workloads that are on-prem for any number of reasons, yet they want that same public cloud experience. How do I enable that self-service experience for my end users? And that's where I think we've seen customer demand, and where we've tried to address that with this portfolio of GreenLake services, right? Being the as-a-service brand from an HPE perspective. And more, that's where we're seeing that demand. How do we deliver that same cloud experience, yet where people need it?
And quick follow-up on that, when we talk about this cloud experience, and if you kind of go back for a second to both your OCI days as well as your pre-AWS days, I mean, when we were kind of doing the show back then, I think one of those first drivers, and you kind of mentioned it, was, hey, everyone thought because it's metered, we're going to have an economic advantage. But then also the big bugaboo was security at the time. But all of that has evolved very differently over time to the point that, yes, good economics can be seen, but like if you go look at like the latest KubeCon, there's a lot of cost management companies out there right now all of a sudden. And why? Because some things, weren't necessarily controlled properly. And security is done, as good, if not better, a lot of times right now. And so did this really factor in to the formation of GreenLake? Like, what was the thought process of as a service, and what was the founding principles around it all?
Yeah, no, you're right. I think it starts with that consumption model. How do I think about a unit of measure that you can now deliver these services? And as an enterprise, I can consume it in a OpEx as opposed to writing a big check every year for that traditional step function of IT costs, right? A big CapEx. I have to plan what are my capacity needs for the year. How do I make sure I have budget for, and again, write a big check for that hardware approach. I think the OpEx piece, right, that lever of that utility consumption model is absolutely a piece, but you hit on something that I think is spot on. Early days of, do I run this on-prem or do I run it in the public cloud, was driven by security concerns. Oh my gosh, I can't be in a multi-tenant security environment, right? Everything has evolved in that regard. In the public cloud, to your point, you can certainly achieve very high levels of security for any number of things. You can even see from a compliance perspective, there's a lot of ways in which you can do that. I think the driver of why you're still seeing on-prem adoption comes more to a couple of different dimensions. In some ways, it's that cost coming back. While that utility consumption model, that pay for what you use, works, when I'm running a persistent workload, I'm not scaling up, scaling it down. I'm not turning it off on the weekends. It's running around the clock 24/7. Usually it's cheaper to run that in a private cloud context, right? If I'm controlling it. And even if you think about the other reasons why people are running it on-prem, it is that speed of light is still a problem that we haven't solved for, right? I still have large data gravity elements, right? Where is my data? Where am I ingesting that data? Where do I need to compute against that data? Oftentimes it's in a private cloud environment or private environment. And I need these either as cloud adjacent services or where I can gain quick access to them. But it started with that vision of cost. And if I can just consume this by the drink instead of investing way ahead, this is going to be cheaper. I think that's where that as a service experience has kind of met that demand. How do you solve in that same way, but now deliver it in that single tenant private cloud environment to address those different concerns of where do I need this? How am I providing this with other adjacent services or meeting it where I need it to be based on my users or my customers?
Nice. Yeah. And so with that kind of background out of the way, so if somebody were to just come up to you and say, hey, give us, what is HPE GreenLake, right? Give us an overview of the technology, the services, and a little bit of, kind of the concepts behind it from a technology and delivery and operation standpoint.
Yeah. If the elevator is only going to go so many floors and I only have so many seconds to describe it, here's the way I would do it. HPE GreenLake is the edge to cloud platform. And what I mean by that is it is a collection of services and offerings that can be consumed as a service. So while I'm providing, in many cases, dedicated infrastructure, it may come in the form of compute, storage, networking. It may come in the form of operating services on behalf of a customer, however we're delivering that. In most cases, this is delivering it in an on-prem, colo, or edge location. And that's increasingly important. How do I deliver a form factor where I can have dedicated infrastructure, but provided in an edge location? Think of it like a branch or a store or manufacturing edge or just even geographically forward deploying these resources, because I need that experience on how I can consume this all as a service. So I'm paying for it as I use it, even though it's dedicated to me and provided in the form of physical resources on-prem, I'm still delivered it in a consumption model. How do I commit to certain levels of spend or reserve, if you will? And then as I burst into that, I have that capacity available and I can ebb and flow as I need to, just like in the public cloud, but now delivered where I need it to be. GreenLake itself is a very expansive portfolio. So there's suites of services and different offerings within that platform solution that can meet different needs depending on what a customer is looking for, from self-managed storage or compute resources all the way through high-performance computing environments, all the way through full cloud services, like a full private cloud experience where the entire thing is operated for you and delivered as a collection of services, capabilities, SLAs, if you will.
Yeah, one of the things that jumped out at me, and again, I feel like the industry sometimes new things happen. A lot of things tend to sort of follow a trend. People kind of jump on it and kind of march in the same direction. I feel like GreenLake is kind of taken a somewhat of a different approach. Especially as we've seen some of these transitions. You guys talk a lot about bringing the cloud to IT, bringing the cloud to data. What does that mean in terms of, we still have a world in which, 90% of spend for the most part is still hasn't moved to the cloud yet. But what is that like bringing the cloud to IT, bringing the cloud to data? What does that really mean in terms of what it delivers for customers in terms of technology execution?
Yeah, I think data is that core asset. And more, I think as a company, they'll start to think about this even in their overall financial profile. What is my data? How am I leveraging that data? How am I monetizing that data? This becomes that lifeblood. But that is a big chunk. Where does it reside? Where am I ingesting this? How do I bring the cloud experience that I need to where that data is, whether it's to act on it, derive insights from it, vend it out in certain ways. So GreenLake, the whole premise around that is how do we actually bring these services such that I can bring them to where my data is and or deliver that data, consume that data where I need it to be. So we think about the edge to cloud platform as kind of an overall experience, or even that tagline, the cloud that comes to you. It's all about delivering that same cloud experience. Again, a consumption model, pay for what I need, but it's delivered where I need it to be, whether it's in my data center, adjacent to, or even hosting that critical data, those mission critical systems where that data is housed, or it's in a third-party colo, obviously, or even edge locations where I can, again, bring that compute and the resources that I need to meet that data where and when I need it.
And so, Brian, let me ask you this, because when we're talking about, let's say the bringing the cloud in kind of approach, one of the first things that pops into my mind, of course, economics, which we already talked about, but operations and not just operations of, hey, there's an architect or an admin and they have to go do care and feeding, if you will, of servers and infrastructure, but infrastructure as code, right? Automation of a lot of these things. What we're seeing increasingly is the infrastructure being completely automated and in times often rolled into development pipelines. And so how does that methodology fit in with something like this?
Yeah. So this is exactly the trend that we see as well. And as I mentioned earlier, GreenLake being a large portfolio of different offerings, the reason why we have different offerings is they will serve different personas. In many cases, we have, a consumption-based offering that is still serving an IT admin persona, giving them the tools to manage this, but they in turn are operating or vending these services to their internal users. In the other case, you're spot on. If we think about things like API, CLI interfaces, the standardization of those tools used for orchestration, management of infrastructure, serving those developer personas, IT or DevOps type of tool chain, that is a huge piece of where we see adoption and driving a lot of these GreenLake solutions. So again, going up the stack a little bit and providing that full platform experience. As an example, we announced the launch of our private cloud enterprise solution, this is specifically to serve those end user personas. So it's not just, can I deliver you these IT services, those cloud primitives in your data center or an edge or colo, but how do I enable your developers to directly consume them? Again, via those standard interfaces. If you think about the ecosystem around that, right? Like there's a GreenLake Terraform provider, right? So I can use those native services in commonly used toolchain, things like Ansible or Chef or Puppet, enabling those to work and operate and manage workloads now running in that GreenLake environment is critical, because that overall operator experience, I think, has been one of the challenges with more and more organizations saying, I have limited resources. I would rather focus them higher up on things that are more strategic and valuable to my business than the underlying care and feeding of the infrastructure below.
Yeah. HPE has always sort of been a bellwether company in the industry. I'm curious, you guys just finished a huge conference. You were over in Europe talking to a lot of companies. As GreenLake evolves, do you see people, do you see your customers, do you see even your partners, start to ask you now for different things as maybe the economy starts to shift, or, their workloads have sort of matured and evolved? I'm curious kind of what the vibe was, from your ecosystem, given where we are today and, in 2022 and some of the things that may or may not happen in 2023. Has it changed a lot from, say, the beginning of the year? Has it changed, in the last 6 months? Are you, what are you hearing from that ecosystem?
Yeah, it was interesting being in Europe in particular. Some of the things are the same trends and themes that we've seen all over. If you think about no IT organization is getting more budget. So it's always about, how do I do more with less, which comes back to some of that operator experience. How can you help me vend services to my constituents without me taking on more and more roles, responsibilities with my limited staff? So we see a lot of that shift to adopting things as a service, helping solve that. In Europe in particular, and I think this is a theme that we will continue to run into everywhere, there's a lot of data sovereignty, right? So we talk about data gravity and how do you put resources where you need it to reside. Oftentimes that's the bigger barrier to adoption, is I actually need things to live within certain geopolitical boundaries. The way I control that is by delivering these as private services. Yet I still have the same needs or asks for that self-service, that infrastructure as code experience. So that coming together, I think, is key. But a lot of the same patterns, right? It's how do I do more with less, and how do I in turn enable that cloud experience for my end users?
Very nice. Very nice. So, Brian, we'll close this out with maybe a question about use cases a little bit, but also about what's possible. So in your conversations, what surprises people the most when they start to understand what's possible with HPE GreenLake, and something that maybe wasn't there, a few years ago?
Sure. I can give you a great example, because we're hot on the heels of showing this at Discover, our conference in Europe. Many folks, they may not be aware of GreenLake as a whole. Those that are aware of GreenLake, I think some of it were based on early perceptions, which was still around, as HPE introduced GreenLake as a brand and as a service. The early years of GreenLake were really around delivering the same hardware infrastructure solutions that we've been providing, but now in a consumption as a service model. Well, we've continued to progress along that, where we're moving higher up, delivering full services, full cloud services. So we touched on HPE GreenLake for private cloud enterprise. It's kind of amazes people because they're not aware that we had such an offering. You mean you can actually deliver me a private cloud, giving me that same public cloud experience, but yet on-prem? Like, nobody had any idea we were providing that. Well, build on that, we actually demonstrated interoperability with AWS as an example, where I can now easily deploy the AWS EKS Anywhere as the underlying Kubernetes runtime within my HPE GreenLake private cloud. Oh my gosh, right? I mean, the number of conversations I had with people that were like, not to overplay it, but it's like mind blown. I had no idea that HPE was doing this kind of thing. But they would do it in a German accent and much more articulate than I am. But it was great. It was fun to have those conversations, and more importantly, to actually show them and demonstrate it and make it tangible for them. We had a whole section set out of test drives where people could actually hands-on keyboard actually do this themselves, and it was just eye-opening for them. They didn't realize HP was doing this kind of thing, and it was cool to make the experience tangible for them.
Yeah, no, that's very, very cool. And sort of apropos, you're talking about knocking down technology walls in Berlin, which, famously knocked down the wall, 20 plus years ago. So
there you go.
Yeah, no, that's it's awesome. And again, it's good to sort of be able to contrast it, especially timing wise. We spent a little bit of time in the last couple of weeks talking about AWS reInvent. It's good to contrast it against, the other view of what's going on in the cloud world, since I think everybody's kind of coming to the realization that we're now kind of reaching another inflection point of like, the cloud does certain things, it does them very well, but the broader scope of what companies have to do, like you said, whether it's at the edge, whether it's forward deployments, whether it's on premises and in the cloud, you got to be able to cover all those things, and bringing together a lot of complicated technologies is really, really important. Brian, thank you so much for all the insight today. I think it was great for us to catch up and sort of both get a sense of historically how HPE is involved, but also like what you guys are doing today and tangibly doing today. Aaron, actually, let me ask one last thing. For anybody who didn't get a chance to be with you last week or to see what's going on, what's if you're talking to somebody, even over the holidays, what's the best way to sort of know to engage with the team to sort of get started with what's going on with GreenLake?
Yeah, I think there's a wealth of information. Hopefully, we're including in the show notes that you can come everything from learning more about GreenLake solutions, including private cloud enterprise, or even to take a test drive and test these technologies and user experiences out yourself.
Fantastic. Well, Brian, thank you so much for that. And yeah, I've already confirmed everything will be in the show notes. So if you hear this and that is of interest to you, go ahead and click on that, definitely. And with that, I'm going to close out this week. So for everyone out there, first of all, we're closing in on the end of the year. So we've got kind of our usual end of year shows coming up. So we encourage you to stay tuned for those. But if you enjoy this, please, as always, tell a friend and leave a review. If wherever you get your podcast, you are able to do that. So on behalf of Brian, in this week, it's Brian Gracely and myself. Please, thank you for listening. Stay safe out there. Enjoy the holidays. Go spend some time with your family. And we'll talk to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.